This is the Sustainable IT Insights channel with David Daoud, hosted on the Bright Talk Network. As a principal analyst at the advisory firm Compliance Standards LLC and host of the Trending Paths podcast, David brings you this new episode exploring the challenges of managing sustainable IT practices. Thank you for tuning in to this latest episode.
All right, today I have the pleasure of speaking with my good friend Julien Blin, who will take me out of my comfort zone by talking about a sector I clearly have no understanding, though aware it's a hot topic, and that is sport technology. Julien and I worked together some years ago before he went on to work for the likes of Google and Samsung, and then he created his own company called Upside Global, which tracks this unknown world to me, that is the sports technology. So Julien, I know you worked for the likes of Google and Samsung that certainly have interest in such things as wearables and sports. How did you get from that world into the world where you are today?
So how did I get from like Google and Samsung? Well, so I always tell the people that about 10 years ago when I was living in San Jose, California, I work for big technology companies, but I always loved sports, and I wanted to be find a way to be involved and work with professional teams, help them in some fashions. But I had zero connections in sports with any teams. So I literally overnight I sent an email to the president of the Earthquakes, a top MLS team in San Jose, and the next day I heard back from the head athletic trainer, we now have known for 10 years. And then I went on to talk to the Warriors, the 49ers. I became friends with Roger Craig, all-time great in the NFL that played with Reggie Rice and Steve Young. And, fast forward 10 years, I built an ecosystem of 7,000 sports and tech executive. But think of myself as a technology scout. I recommend technology to some of the best teams in the world, anywhere from, All Blacks from New Zealand to, the Miami Heat or the New York Knicks, or the Penguins in the NHL, or the Australian Open tennis. And I typically work with people in the performance or the medical department. Which is very different from other departments like the head of digital, the CTO. We really care about things like AR, VR, mobile, social, ticketing, IT stuff. So you have to make the distinction between the two world because they're very different and they have very different types of interest towards technology.
Yeah, it's absolutely a fascinating place for sure. But I read somewhere that there are market sizing that sort of project the next few years to be anywhere between 60 billion to 100 billion dollars. You talk quite a bit to investors, venture capital, and equity. What's your assessment of the size of the tech, the sports tech industry?
I think there's some very large. I mean, the size of the sports tech market, I think it varies depending on how you cut it, how you define it. I mean, if you include things like, the teams, right? The ownership side, it's very different from the sports technology side. The sports technology side, and even so, you have, for example, performance technology, right? So things like GPS systems to track distance run. You've got the heart rate monitors. You've got the hydration assessment system, the sleep trackers, and then you've got the things like AMS platform, which the team used to triangulate data like GPS, cardio, and then, like I said, you've got the entire different market, which is more digital. So things like AR, VR, Web3, mobile, social, IT, which are much bigger budgets, right? So typically, when you're dealing with the teams and they're looking to buy performance technology, so GPS, cardio, right? Sleep trackers, that's typically in the MLB, the NBA, that would be between, let's say, 200 and 300,000 a year budgets per teams, right? So if you're looking at a digital budgets for things like AR, VR, mobile, social, you're looking at millions of dollars per year, right? So, for example, I was talking to a big European clubs on the largest soccer teams in Europe, and they were quoting me something like $5 million a year just on mobile, social, AR, VR. So these are much bigger budgets, okay? So when I talk to investors, they really don't always understand what are the markets, how do you divide the markets? They don't understand the budgets. So that's why I like to kind of give them a crash course, if you will, for sports and tech.
Yeah, and I can imagine, I'm putting myself in their shoes really. How do you even segment the sports, the technology? I mean, we all know about wearables. I mean, it's something that
Yeah,
big companies have always been involved. I know there are companies that focus on sort of the stadium experience, right? The venue
correct.
technology, they call it. There's got to be some companies that focus quite a bit on analytics, because there's a lot of keeping track. Anytime I watch by the way, I'm not a big sports guy, but anytime I watch a game, the data is there on the
Mm.
fly immediately all the time. How difficult, how easy or difficult it is to segment this particular market, because it's to your point, it's all over the map. And when you talk to folks that are interested in investing, how do they approach the sports technology? Do they segment them, or do they already have an interest in a particular area? For example,
Usually what happens, so for example, I was talking to a top a VC fund in Europe, and the way it happened, I can't name the name of the company, but
of
basically
course.
they were looking to invest in a particular company in one particular sector, or sports and tech. So that's why they approached me and they said, look, we want to understand about the whole market as a whole, right? So performance stuff, fan experience, the whole market, right? And so that they could intelligently talk to that potential investments, that company, so that when they go and talk to them and say, look, we can invest in your company, they want to make sure that they're knowledgeable about that particular segment in the sports tech market, if that makes sense.
So, do you include sports medicine as part of? Do you see trends taking place in sports medicine, or is it a completely different sort of
So
part?
yeah, sports medicine, it could mean different things. Sport medicines could be include things like wearable technology to track, patches measuring hydration, glucose, cortisol, lactate, using wearable technology. That's part of sports medicine, right? You could have like some mobile application using advanced AI to take that wearable data and give you actionable health insights. For example, it would say, okay, well, you burn too many calories today, you should slow down, right? So, or we noticed that you ate too much carb, right? So you might want to eat something different, or your heart rate is going too fast, right? So that could be part of sports medicine, but sports medicine could include hardware technologies like wearables, as
Mhm.
well as software technology and AI. So it's a very broad. In fact, I don't typically use like sports medicine. I use terms like sports performance, because sports performance include all of the above, right? So GPS, heart rate, sleep trackers, hydration assessment tools, computer vision systems sometimes, all the way down to like rehabilitation technology, robotic, products. I mean, it's quite broad.
Yeah, and you cover. I'm assuming your coverage is North America and Europe primarily, or do you
Now
also
we cover
look at?
everything. We work with the Australian Open tennis all the way in Australia. We work with the, All Blacks in New Zealand. I mean, we have work with South American soccer teams. I mean, we work with teams all over the world because they all, at the end of the day, they all have the same needs. They're always looking for cutting edge technology to reduce injuries, to improve load management, to improve sleep management, to improve, reduce reduction concussions. And they're looking to, how do we improve the fan experience? How do we increase the top line, right? Because they have to make money, right? So they all have the same issues. They're always looking at the same things. So yeah, it's a global business, right? So we work with lots of teams all over the world.
Are there any differences between leagues? And I'm thinking NBA versus NFL versus European soccer. Do you see one particular league showing more interest in new technology, or is this across the board?
I think it's across the board. I would say that there are some teams that are more advanced than others. If I take, for example, maybe the Premier League, they're pretty advanced when it comes to technology. But I would also say, in the US, right, the NBA is fairly advanced, the NFL is fairly advanced. I think, from my perspective, having worked with so many teams across the world, there are some teams that are harder to break into, and there are some teams that are easier to break into.
Mm.
Um, and so, I'm happy to get into that. But for example, I think that the NBA, it's not easy to get into and talk to the teams. But once you get into the circle, it's easier. The NFL, same thing. It's very hard to get in touch with teams at the beginning. Same with the NHL. From my experience, the MLS are pretty open to have
Mm.
conversations. Now the MLS, they typically have bigger budgets for performance technologies annually. So if you look at the Premier League, very highly fought after, league. Everybody wants to talk to them, but once you get to talk to some teams, you get into the network, then it's easier. But again, it's not easy if you're an outsider, you don't have a reputation, you don't have a network, and what do you bring to the table to those teams, right? So I always kind of presented myself as, yes, a scout, but I don't want to be a sales guy. I just want to be able to provide them feedback on. So, for example, right, we have teams reaching out to me or to us before competition. They want to know what are the biggest technology they should use to improve sleep, right? So it's a two-way street. I reach out to them to recommend technologies or send them an analysis or reports or studies that we've done. But many times they come to me. They come to me and say, look, we're looking to switch to a new vendor. We're exploring a market, a space. Would you recommend that we talk to?
Yeah, speaking of vendors, you know that in the sort of the consumer wearables, you have big brand names involved in the space. Apple, Samsung, you name it. Are there iconic companies out there, recognizable companies out there in the sports technology that people can recognize, or is it fragmented with small companies sort of having a niche play in a particular area of the space?
I think if you look at things like on the performance side, it's mostly driven by small, agile, innovative performance technology companies and startups. Startups most likely, right? It's mostly the majority are startups, very agile companies. They can innovate very quickly and, quite frankly, build technology that the big vendors couldn't build because they have no interest. Like you say, it's a niche market, and most of the time they're just not interested. Of course, there are some exceptions. For example, when Samsung launched their own smart ring, right? Then I could see maybe some teams using that, but for the most part, that came out of company like Oura Ring, which was the pioneer in that space, and company like Samsung, who I work for, they tend to be fast followers, right? So they try to fast follow and build similar technologies, but what they're after is not the sports market. What they're after is the mass market. So because that's not how they're going to make most of their money. But if you're a startup, right, you raise maybe like $10 million, and if you can get into the NBA market or the NCAA market, and then at the global scale, that's a good business for you. But for the big company, it's not. It's small.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, but you did allude earlier that getting into those leagues is very difficult. So you can have a great technology, but if you don't have a convincing go-to-market strategy, you will probably not get through.
So yes, it's very hard to get into, but once you get into, and I wrote some posts about that yesterday, is that you have to have a very solid sales process, right? So you have to have a very good customer service support, because the last thing you want from a team perspective is to work with a company that, they sold you a product, but they're having difficulty to reach out to them when something breaks, when there's issues. And there's many times when startups sometimes do a bad job, providing customer support, and that will have the team to churn, right? So I'm done with those guys. They're not responding. And I always tell people, once you make the sales, then your job is to make sure to keep the customers, because I guarantee you there's like 10 other startups trying to get that same customer. So if you don't do a good job, they're going to, kick you out. And because they are very busy, they're always on the field, taking care of players. They don't have time to spend on their phone for like an hour trying to get a hold of someone. It's just not going to work.
Yeah. I agree with you. I mean, there's a great deal of much more accountability than in any other organizations. You have to win the game when you play the game. Not 3 months from now.
Game, make sure to stay in the game, because you get kicked out of the game.
It's absolutely. So, how in companies you have, an army of, CXOs, so to speak. You have the Chief Information Officer, the CIO. You have the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer. What's the profile of the guy in those sports teams that basically handles technology? Do they have a CTO as well, or do they have different flavors of that?
As I mentioned, right, you have two very distinct departments. You've got the guy that cares about, VR, AR, mobile ticketing, right? Web3. These are like CTOs, head of digital, right? This CIOs, as you mentioned, right? They care more about IT security. So they have those. And then everything about performance, medical products, So the performance side, that's typically managed by the people who buy technology. It's managed by a head of performance, head of sports science, head athlete trainer, head strength coach, people like that. And then you've got the medical side, which is typically like medical directors, team doctors, right? So again, you have to make that distinction. And sometimes in some team, what I see is that those departments don't talk to each other, even between performance department and medical department. So I'm not even talking about the digital
Amazing.
team, not even talking at all to the performance team, right? Most of the time. So they might have some interaction from time to time, but they're just too busy with the day-to-day taking care of the players.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine you do have probably a pretty big ecosystem of venture capital and investors looking to capitalize on those startups and technologies.
Yeah, so there's a lot of sports tech VCs. They typically have LPs and they make investments every year on a number of startups. And then you also have the family offices that are owned by teams. For example, I work with the Dallas Cowboys family office and the Vikings family office in the NFL. And then you also have athletes, right? So I work with a gentleman called Tad Young, who's been an NBA player for 15 years, and he invested in 200 companies, from very small one to bigger companies, and he built his own family office. So you have all those, and then you also have maybe like some corporate VC funds, right? Guys that are like the Samsung Ventures, right, who want to invest in some startups that are innovative because they want to invest in them and maybe bring these to the mass market. So yeah, there's different types and then you got private equity firms, right? The private equity firms, they would buy some teams. Typically, they're not going to buy a small startup necessarily. So that these are the types of investors that there is. And then you've got the angel investors, guys that make a lot of money and they want to invest, in some startup that they find innovative.
Yeah, very interesting. Your favorite technologies for teams right now?
Right now, I would say there's a company that I'm helping support. It's a company that built the next threatening device that collects data. And today, next strength is very important to help to reduce concussions. It's very well documented in the NFL and NHL. So there's a correlation. It's not the only factor, but there's a correlation between neck strength and concussion. If you have a strong neck, you're less likely to have a concussion, right? And that's applicable for sports like hockey, football, even soccer, right? Women's soccer, there's a lot of concussion issues. And of course, so sports like rugby, right? Lots of concussion issues.
For sure.
Even
Yeah.
things like Formula One. Formula One, they take so many G's when they drive they take the turns. I mean, it's just ridiculous how you need to get a strong neck, which, by the way, if you have a strong neck, there's some other advantages, right? So what we found is with some athletes, after they use the product, they had less migraines, no more migraine, no more headaches. So there's a lot of advantages of having a healthy neck, if I may say. But yeah, so that's one of them. There's another company called, I just won't give you the name necessarily, but they have a cognitive training system that using LiDAR technology, which is the same technology that used on Tesla cars. So you're watching a screen, right? You're doing some exercise, and then the LiDAR technology measures distance run very accurately, high jump, reaction time, because it's a radar, right? So, and then you can incorporate force plates on your floor. You can incorporate wearable technology to get a full assessment of your cognitive skills, which is typically something that team miss when they have a guy coming back from an ACL injury. They work on the motor skills, but they forget to work on the cognitive skills, because when you're coming back from an injury, you tend to be kind of apprehensive, right? You hurt your knee. And then, so how do you measure that? Well, you don't know. That's why those technology vendors can help to really understand what was the baseline before the injury so that they can get back up to what they used to be. So that's another one. And then the last one I would mention, it's a company, maybe I mentioned it, it's called Logic Inc. They built a PCR type test based on saliva analysis to measure your hydration level, to know if you're very dehydrated or just dehydrated. Very simple test, very, very inexpensive. You can get a quick results, a reading on your hydration level. And so these are some of my favorite technologies, if I may.
Yes, and those technologies obviously are valid for both team environments, soccer, football, you name it, and individual sports, track and field, boxing, whatever. Right?
For most, most of them, for sure.
Your outlook for the next 5 years? you
For the next
confirm
5 years,
what's.
I think that we'll see is technology will become smarter and provide more what I call actionable health insights to the performance team of the teams, right? So what I mean by that is, think you're using, for example, your wearable device, and it would say player A has a higher chance of injuries for the next game, right? You should do X, Y, Z now to prevent the injury. I think this is where it's going with Gen AI, for example, right? With the advancements with ChatGPT, Google Gemini, Claude, and others, and also the advancement in computer vision systems, where you have already cameras in stadiums in the Premier League when they can capture distance run, things like that, without zero GPS system on the body. So in the future, you'll be able to measure fatigue level just by using a camera and a radar system or computer vision system. So of course, there's still some issues as far as when you have multiple people on the same in the vision, the line of sight. Sometimes those technologies not so great, but I think that's where it's going, right? So technology is smarter, provide more actionable health insights. Also, I think they'll be more advanced in terms of biomechanic analysis or biometrics analysis. I mean, today you can use like patches, right, to measure hydration, cortisol, glucose, lactate level, using what we call microfluidics. Those are very advanced sensors. But now you're seeing the emergence of what I call saliva analysis. So that you take a quick saliva sample, just like you took with COVID-19 test, but you'll be able to measure things like hydration, cortisol, right?
Wow.
Even you can measure things like with your if you had a concussion event based on that as well. So you're going to see a lot of innovation. I mean, robotics is another one. Like the company I mentioned earlier, using the next threatening device, they're using very advanced robotics. It's very safe. It measures everything. It gives you feedback in real time. So I think robotics will play a big part of that. There's another company in New York that built a robotic massage table, and I tried it twice. And it basically gives you a massage. Think of those robots on the Tesla factory line. They give you a massage. You start the massage. You can watch videos. It give you analytics. Everything is controlled. You can switch the soundtrack, and then it stops. If you get up, it just stops. And then if you lay down again, it will just finish the massage, and it's pretty cool. And I think and I know for a fact teams are looking into that to use those new types of product using robotics. So I think you're going to see a lot of innovation in the next few years. But AI, I think AI will be at the core of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the message from you is basically we should expect athletes to become super athletes, right?
In
I
a
mean,
way, yeah.
swimmers, runners, all of those are going to use the latest technology to improve their performance, and so we should expect to see the next generation of athletes to be super athletes.
Yes, I think you'll see those super athletes, but I think at the end of the day, you should not forget that you're dealing with human beings. They
That's
have
right.
feelings, they have
Their
emotions.
limitations.
And so when you have to listen to them, right, as a coach, as a trainer, because technology cannot always tell you everything. And
Yes.
that's where you can miss, just by talking to an athlete. Hey, how you doing today? And, and I think you learn way more by asking those types of questions about how is the family doing? How is everything? Because you might find out that, he's got some issues at home. He's going through a divorce or whatever it is. And having those simple conversation is something that technology will not be able
Never
to
replace.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I work with lots of trainers and coaches, and they always tell me, look, sometimes the easiest thing is just sit down with the athletes and ask them how they're doing.
Yeah. Do you see any of this technology bleeding into the consumer world? I'm assuming if folks like Samsung are
Yeah.
investors in some of these companies, they are looking at the mass market as well.
A lot of the wearable tech, a lot of the sports technology companies, they typically start in sports, in elite sports, but the end goal, especially from an investment perspective, is to target and go beyond sports, right? You get
Hmm.
into like verticals like the mass market, like you said, consumer market. They go into like healthcare, which is highly regulated with FDA regulation. They want it typically they go into like military government. They get into like the industrial space, oil and gas, mining, construction, which are much bigger
Hmm. Of
market, also regulated. So
course.
there's a lot of other avenues that startups typically go to. They start with sports because of the name, because they can claim they work with the 49ers, they work with the Warriors. But at the end of the day, it's a business. So they typically want to get into much bigger market down the road, which for the investors can give them a return on investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, Julian, it looks like you give me a lot to think about, and I really appreciate it. And thank you for your feedback. And let's talk about that again soon.
Okay, that sounds great. But thank you, David. Great to be on your show. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
You just listened to an episode of the Sustainable IT Insights channel. Please subscribe to this channel. More information can be obtained here and on our podcast website at trendingpaths.com. Until our next talk, thank you and goodbye.